Regulating Food and Fuel Consumption by Zaria Turnipseed. When the United States entered the war, President Wilson appointed Herbert Hoover to the post of the United States Food Administration in 1917. Food had become a weapon in World War I, and no country produced more food than America. Hoover succeeded in cutting consumption of foods needed overseas and avoided rationing at home, yet kept the Allies fed. America had to produce the food needed by the new large army America was building, as well as for allied armies and civilians. Hoover designed a voluntary program. He called it food conservation, but many Americans took it to calling it Hooverizing. Various promotions were devised, such as Wheatless Wednesdays and Meatless Mondays. Hoover was convinced that Americans would cooperate voluntarily to support the boys overseas. He did not want a mandatory program and government-regulated rationing. The idea was that American civilians would have to modify their eating habits voluntarily so more food was available for shipment overseas. Now imagine Americans in 1917 already going through the specifics of shortening food with the Food Administration, but then having to go through the shortages of coal as well with the Fuel Administration. To address concerns about a steady supply of fuel to support the military and industrial operations and for use by consumers, in 1917, the Federal Fuel Administration was established and U.S. President Woodrow Wilson appointed Harry A. Garfield to lead the agency. Garfield's main duty was to conserve the coal supply and keep the price within reasonable bounds. The Federal Fuel Administration's main activities were to stimulate an increase in the production of fuel, encourage voluntary economy in the private consumption of fuel, restrict consumption by industries not essential to winning the war, regulate the distribution of coal through a zoning system, and check the inordinate rise of fuel prices by fixing maximum prices within each zone. The women and minorities were very important at this time, since most of the men were away at war. They had to take over the jobs of mining and distributing the coal. But then the Food and Fuel Administration ceased to function on June 30th, 1919. A little bit after World War I ending.